Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be able to say to you, welcome to Cabal Vision HD, the new official Blood Bowl TV.
Hi there folks, I'm the Sage, and in this video I'm going over the changes from the previous version of Blood Bowl, which is the Competition Rules Pack, or CRP, to the new version, Blood Bowl 2016. If you're completely new to the hobby, this video might not be for you, since it really focuses on the changes from the previous version of Blood Bowl to the current one, and it doesn't focus on what the game is as a whole. If you're interested in that, I should have a video introducing the game for you very soon. However, if you're an existing coach and you'd like to know just what changed with the new version, then definitely keep watching. The information that's in this video is based on the rulebook, which you can find in the box set, as well as the first season of the Deathzone supplement, and the errata for that supplement, as well as the Q&A from the Games Workshop site, and of course the Legendary Races PDF. So all of those sources, as far as they're freely available, are linked in the video description, so you can have a look at them if you like, but I'll be going over everything that's relevant in this video. I'll briefly go over what information you can find where. So the rulebook goes with the box set, and it's really just the basic rules that you need for a one-off game between an orc team with no troll and no goblin, and a human team with no ogre. So those are only the very basics, only the skills that starting players need to get acquainted with the game, which means it's great as a teaching set, not so much as a rule set for league play. And that's where the Deathzone comes in, because Deathzone is the league supplement, and the first season also contains a bunch of races that we can play. So those are the Skaven, Dwarves, Nurgle, Dark Elves, Wood Elves, High Elves, and Pro Elves. And it also contains star player info, so for Hackflim, Scuttlespike, Grim Ironjaw, Roxana Darknail, Jordel Freshbreeze, Eldril Sidewinder, and Prince Moranion. And there's also a new star player in there, Guffle Pussmaw, who is only available to the Nurgle team. So the box set already has the info for Morgenthorg, Griff Overwald, the Mighty Zug, and Varag Ghoulchewer. So those are the stars that we have available, those are the races that we have available in this set. So there's also an errata which fixes a bunch of issues that were in the Deathzone supplement. These are mostly version management, although some are just screw-ups. And there's also the Legendary Races PDF, and this has info on pretty much all the races that are not in the box set or in Deathzone, except for Slann. So Guffle Pussmaw is a rotter with an armor increase and agility increase, so he's got 5, 3, 4, 9. And he has Foul Appearance and Monstrous Mouth. Now what Monstrous Mouth does is it gives you catch, plus it makes you immune to Strip Ball. This is because he actually has an extra mouth in his belly, rather like the Two Heads Rotters on Blood Bowl 2. So this guy costs 210k, and yeah, it's a new star. Before getting into the real rules changes, I just want to get some name change stuff out of the way. Pro Elves are now called Elf Union. Chaos Pact have become the Chaos Renegades, Underworld are called Underworld Denizens, Necromantic have become Necromantic Horror, Undead are now the Shambling Undead, Chaos have become Chaos Chosen, and Khemri will now be known as Khemri Tomb Kings. So, additionally, the Nurgle Warriors are now called Bloaters, and the Beast of Nurgle is now called a Rot Spawn. There's also a lot of positional names that have changed in the Races of Legend PDF, but you can look for all of those yourself since it's freely available. Now, another thing that's changed is that Bloodwiser Babes are now called Bloodwiser Kegs, because, you know, it's quite alright to pay the referee to look the other way while you cut off a guy's head with a chainsaw and your teammates are holding him down, but please don't use the word babe because that's bad. There are two changes to the game which I consider to be effectively irrelevant to the rules. One is that the scale changed, so it went from 25 to 32mm bases. However, the relative scales all stay the same. So the pitch gets bigger, the passing ruler gets bigger, but nothing really changes. You can still use your old passing tables and your old interception tables, both of which I've linked in the video description, and you can continue to play as is. The only reason this matters is if you need to carry it somewhere, or if you need to organize a tournament and you're worried about how much space you've got on the tables. The other thing that's changed is also not that relevant. The 4-minute turn timer and the illegal procedure rules have become optional rules, which means they weren't optional before, which means everyone uses them all the time, right? I don't know anyone who does, except for sometimes 4-minute turns in tournaments. really, this already was optional, so that's really a non-change. There are some changes that have a real in-game effect, but it's fairly minor. So the first of these is that the human catcher went down in cost from 70k to 60k. And I think this is decent. A buff to human catchers is something that the community has been discussing for ages. What I don't like is the reason they give for why they chose 60k over, say, the Armor 8 buff that others have used, like Cyanide's Blood Bowl 2. And this reason is that the model, so the miniature, did not look like it had Armor 8. And that sets a very bad precedent for me. It means that the look of the model is becoming the driving factor for how the rules should be, rather than the other way around. And I think that's really, really wrong. So I don't mind the change, but I mind the reason for the change. We see the same applied in a worse sense in the new skill for gutter runners, which is called Weeping Blades. And the reason they have it is because the models are holding knives. So we need to let them do something with those knives. And what it does is pretty silly. If a gutter runner, by blocking, causes a badly hurt result, which does not get appoed, then you roll a die, and on a 4+, the badly hurt turns into a miss next game. Not really all that relevant, not really needed, and the reasoning is, well, it's got knives in it. One change that I do like is the new skill for the treeman, which is called Timber. What the skill does is it allows your teammates to assist you in standing up, provided they're not in a tackle zone from an opponent. So if you have 1 assist while standing up, it's a 3+. If you have 2 or more, then it becomes a 2+. In the rules in the base game, or rather in the Death Zone expansion, it says that Halfling and Wood Elf Treeman both get this, but actually it's been errata, only the Halfling Treeman gets it, and I think that's a good change. Another relatively minor rule change is argue the call. So the head coach now has a role, and which means that they can argue with the ref when they try to send someone off. So what happens there is that instead of going to the out box, you can try and make them go into the reserves box, so they don't stay on the pitch, but at least you get them back for a later drive. How you do this is you roll a d6. On a roll of 1, you get sent off, that is the head coach. Sounds awful, but really it's not. The only 2 things that would happen are you're no longer allowed to try this again because you're not there, and if a brilliant coaching comes up, then you suffer a -1 to your roll. Well, who cares? The thing that happens is on a 2 to 5, nothing happens and the player still gets sent off. And on a 6, they go to reserves rather than the sent-off box. However, they don't stay on the pitch and it's still a turnover. So the effects are relatively minor. I think it's a nice and fluffy rule. It fits, and so I approve. So far, this has been fairly minor stuff, but there are a few rules which really are game changers. The first of those are the special play cards. Now, these are decks that used to be in the CRP under optional inducement rules, but are now part of the main game. So they're included in the box set, and the box set says you get D3 each. And in Death Zone, they've changed this to make it dependent upon team value. So higher team value matchups get more cards, and also coaches get to draw a number, but then discard a number from those again. So it's a little bit less random, but still hugely impactful on the game. What's important here, and that is really, really a huge mistake in my opinion, is that the 2 decks that they've included are Miscellaneous Mayhem and Random Events. Now, Miscellaneous Mayhem used to cost 50k in CRP. Random Events used to cost 200k in CRP, and they were balanced for this cost. And what they've done in Blood Bowl 2016 is said, well, you've got these 2 decks and you can choose which one to draw from. Well, what do you think? You draw from Random Events, right? Well, wrong, because they've actually swapped the names. So the 10 guards that are now in Random Events used to be in Miscellaneous Mayhem and the other way around. But other than that, the 2 are nowhere near balanced against each other. And that is really, really silly. Too bad. I hope they fix it. There are 2 more very important changes that have in-game effects, as opposed to, say, league play and between-game meta effects, and these are that the wizard is still absent from the game. It's not in the box set, it's not in Death Zone Season 1. Now, we do expect it to show up in Season 2 or something, but they might have even chosen to leave it out altogether. We don't know. The other one is probably one of the most talked about things so far, is the nerf to piling on. And this is such a big nerf that it might as well mean that piling on is gone. Because what it does is it says, If you want to use piling on, so first you need to give piling on to a player, which costs 20k or 30k. If you want to use piling on, you need to use a team reroll to do so. And that is such a huge cost that I think that most good coaches will no longer be picking piling on at all. And in fact, the rules specifically say it has to be a team reroll. And if you know the wording of pro, it actually specifies what you're allowed to use it on, which means you can't even use pro to get that reroll for the piling on. I think we won't be seeing a lot of piling on, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, but if you wanted to remove the skill, then just remove the skill. I don't know. I don't like it. Also, it would require a huge rethinking of the balance of the teams. So, yeah, I don't like this. There are some good suggestions out there for how to fix piling on. I don't think this is it. In fact, they included some of those suggestions in the rulebook. So they said piling on would not stack with claw and with mighty blow in the wording of the skill, but that was actually from a previous version, so they again errata this out already. As I mentioned before, there are some effects that are not in the game, but that do have a huge impact on how the game is played, and they relate to league play. So the first of these is that there's a new rule called expensive mistakes. This is a bank rule that kind of replaces spiraling expenses, which is now optional. And what it does is it gives you a probability of losing cash after a match, and that probability gets worse when your bank increases. So if you're under 300k, then you can only lose a small amount, and there's a chance that you do and a chance that you don't. But as soon as you go over 300k, you get a chance to lose half of your treasury, and that chance also gets worse as your bank increases. So this is a kind of a limiting factor on saving up and hoarding lots of cash. That sounds like a bank rule that's not that bad. If it replaces spiraling expenses, then if you're a high team value team, then it's actually better for you because you don't suffer spiraling expenses and you can still save up some cash. But the reason it's not is because there's a different change as well, and that is redrafting. What redrafting does is it means that every season you need to pay for your players again. So you start off your first season with 1 million in gold, but your second season you get 1 million plus whatever you had in your treasury, plus 10k per game played last season, plus 5k for each touchdown scored last season, and for 5k for each casualty scored last season. That is the money you have. That is the money you need to pay for your team value. So if you want to have rerolls, you need to pay for them again. If you want to have your old players, you need to pay for them again, including the 50k for strength, or the 40k for agility, or the 60k for clawpome. Well, not piling on, but so you need to really earn your team value for next season, and that is a huge change. The impact that this change has really depends on the length of the season. If your seasons are short, then the number 10k per game played plus 5k per casualty plus 5k per touchdown is going to be low, which means that there's a very hard limit to how high team value your league can grow. If your league has very long seasons, then those amounts will be fairly high, and you can probably grow to fairly big teams. So there's a clear link between season length and team value. I don't really like that. If I want to play team value 1800 or 2000 in a short run league, that should be possible. In addition to this, there's a rule about players wanting to leave your team. So this depends upon the number of seasons that they've played. After 2 seasons, you roll for them. If you roll lower than the number of seasons that you've played, then they want to leave. And wanting to leave doesn't mean they're gone, but it means you need to pay them extra. You need to pay them 20k per season that they've played for you in order to keep them on board. Which means that the longer they play for your team, the more they're going to cost you, the more they're going to drive your total team value down if you do decide to keep them. So that's a very limiting factor to team value growth. It's a different system. I'd have to see it in action, but I do think it's going to be more limiting than spiraling expenses was. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is different. I, for one, really like high team value play. And importantly, I like teams that build their players slowly. I like teams that have Saurus, which don't have Mighty Blow and which take 100 games to build. And those kinds of teams are hurt more by this than teams that build Claw Mighty Blow killers and grow them very quickly, because they can grow in a shorter amount of time and thus suffer less from these consequences. So that's one thing I really don't like. However, there is a redeeming factor here, and that's the MVP rule. So previously, the MVP was random. It could be assigned to anyone on your team. And currently, in the new rules, the MVP gets awarded to one of 3 players whom you can determine. So no more MVPs to loners, no more MVPs to dead guys. Instead, no more MVPs to stars. Instead, you pick 3 players that you would like to see the MVP go to, and it goes to one of those. So you roll a d3. That means that Black Orcs, Saurus, Flesh Golems, Storm Vermin are all going to develop much quicker because the MVP tends to land on them because you pick them. And so you get a much faster team development for the kinds of players that would normally be very slow to skill, especially early on before they get skills like Mighty Blow. So in that sense, the kinds of players that I just described, the ones that don't tend to build that fast, do build faster under these rules. Now, this is one that I like. I think D3 is a bit not random enough. I would have liked to see it a bit more random, but being able to kind of guide your team towards the right kind of development is definitely something that I would enjoy. So the MVP rule already kind of helps against attrition a little bit. It makes building and rebuilding easier. And another factor that mitigates attrition considerably is that niggling injuries are no longer permanent. In the new system, after every season, you roll a d6 per niggling injury on your team, and on a 4+ it gets cured. But if you have an apothecary, that means it actually gets cured on a 3+. Obviously, this will help your team in the long run, and it will reduce the amount of attrition that you suffer. Taken together, these new rules will really change the face of attrition, because before we had only 2 timescales at which attrition really happened. One was within the game, which still matters a lot. Simply outstrengthening your opponent, having more players on the pitch is a big deal, but this attrition gets reduced by the huge nerf to piling on. And between games, we have the effects of permanent injuries or missed next games, which also get reduced by the effects of piling on being nerfed, but also the new MVP rule means that build-up between games will be faster, or your team will get better at a higher pace. But then we have this new layer of attrition, which happens after a season, but that's going to affect everyone at the same time, and that has some really big advantages, because it means that there will be fewer huge mismatches. It'll be easier for new coaches to join an existing league at the start of a new season, and that's a huge advantage, especially for scheduled leagues. So all in all, I think this is really cool. What I would like to see is how the current continuous leagues actually handle this. So for instance, Ranked and Black Box on Fumble, or Coal on Cyanide, the kinds of leagues that run continuously. Also, this system is really oriented towards a league that runs a league length in terms of a number of games, which is fine. But if you have a league where people can play whenever they want, and a league length is measured in months or weeks rather than number of matches, then the system doesn't work nearly as well, because people who play a lot will get to keep their high team value. People who don't play as much will actually get hurt more, and that's going to be demotivating for people. So I would like to see a fix for that. We'll see how that goes. So now you know all the big changes so far with the Blood Bowl 2016, but there are a few things in the rulebook which, if you read them as written, would result in some pretty stupid stuff. So these things have not been errata yet, but the Wood Elf Lineman is listed as 7k rather than 70k. Silly. And the wrestle skill has been rewritten in such a way that if you use it as it is in the rulebook, sacking a wrestler and having him use wrestle on you would result in a turnover for you, because the skill now reads if the player with the ball uses wrestle, rather than the active player is holding the ball and uses wrestle. That is a huge difference. It's going to be pretty silly. No one in the right mind would use the skill as it is in the book, but a rules lawyer could give you a hard time, and then you'd have to get into a fight and stuff. So I expect an errata on those 2 points very soon. There's a few things that I'm quite disappointed they didn't change that I would have liked to see differently. So I would have liked to see the overtime rules adjusted, because the current rules say it's golden goal, so if you get the ball and you score, then you win. I'm okay with that. However, if you're the defending party in overtime and the other guy doesn't score, that means you won the drive, and I feel you should at least win the game if you defend successfully for 8 turns in overtime. And unfortunately, that's not in. Another thing is Chaos Pact. Chaos Pact is a brutal min-max team, potentially, or I should say Chaos Marauders now, and I would have very much liked to see the mutation access added to the big guys and strength access removed from the Marauders to give it a much more balanced and much more interesting overall flavor. Yeah, well, maybe next time. One of my viewers talked to Andy Hoare over the weekend, and he had some information to share. Now, I've checked with Andy and confirmed that this is true. So, we expect Deathzone Season 2 to come out spring 2017. It will have goblins, and they will have new secret weapons. It'll also have Underworld and Chaos Pact, and this means that if goblins are changing when Season 2 comes out, then maybe Chaos Pact will as well, one can hope. We'll see 2 new referee models from Forge World, one halfling, one goblin. There's pics of those online, and they'll be out before Christmas. We'll have new teams coming later, so dwarves and goblins will be in plastic, and then pro elves and Nurgle will be in resin. And in 2018, we expect to see halflings and the rest of the elves. However, given the success of the initial release, Games Workshop might actually hire an additional sculptor and get the teams produced even quicker, and we'll also see the deck of special play cards increased sometime next year. Pretty cool stuff. Well, this concludes the summary of everything that's changed from CRP to Blood Bowl 2016. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to thank Gegster over at the NAF for posting a very, very helpful summary, which includes most of these changes, and you can find that link below as well. I'd also like to thank Dode because he went over the text with me in chat and filled out some of the blanks. And thank you for watching. I hope you liked it. If you did, remember to hit the thumbs up button, and if you'd like to see more of my content, Blood Bowl news, also Blood Bowl 2 gameplay, then do hit the subscribe button to follow this channel. See you later, folks.